All right, Amber, would you like to get us started then?
Great. Thank you so much for bringing us together. OPI and Metametrics are here today to talk with all of you today about the pilot study that is being conducted across the state this school year. So thank you for your time and your attention today to some of the logistics and the details that we'll be presenting. If there are questions, feel free to put them in the chat room and we will go ahead and address those at the end of the presentation here. Our agenda for the day is we will be able to hear a little bit from OPI about their vision for this program and this pilot study, and then you'll hear a little about Metametrics and who we are. We'll talk through the pilot study overview by looking at the purpose and the sample, the logistics and the timeline so that things are clear to all of our participants. And then you'll also get a chance to hear from our team about some of the professional learning opportunities and the tools associated with the Lexile and Quantile frameworks. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bayless.
Thank you. Welcome, first of all, everybody. Thank you for coming to the morning session of the Metametrics pilot study and assessment system. And what we're working on right now is at the state level, we're attempting to implement a novel pilot study to determine the ultimate feasibility of some of these ideas. So if you could go ahead to the next slide. There we go. So the state of Montana is one of the first states that's attempting something like this, and we're doing it using some of our budget from the CARES Act. We have partnered with Metametrics, and I wanted to say thank you, first of all, to all of the participating districts, to all of the districts that are willing to fill out the paperwork and try to help make this happen. Can we hop to the next slide now? Thank you. So the ultimate goal is we want to reduce the burden on local districts of the state mandated assessments. The state mandated assessments at this time are somewhat burdensome for local districts. I'm sure that you all are well aware. I'm young enough that I've had to take them when I was in high school, and I remember disliking them to a pretty substantial degree. So if we can expand the available options for districts, if we can expand the available test windows, and if we can expand the way in which we can assess districts in a federally defensible fashion, that will be the ultimate goal of the study. So right now what we're looking at is we're trying to produce results that are capable of establishing defensibility at the federal level that would allow districts to perform a degree of assessment for which assessments they want to use. And it would allow districts to have an expanded time window when they can perform those assessments. That's sort of the ultimate goal. We're working with Metametrics in order to determine what aspects of that we can actually implement. And we're also working with Metametrics to establish federal defensibility so that we can prove to lawmakers that we are capable of doing this with our systems. So the partnership with Metametrics operates right now through the ESSER-1 funding, and they've been absolutely instrumental in making this a possibility. This requires more modern data analysis techniques and larger sample sizes for our data. And so we're actually quite thankful for their assistance in allowing us to go forward with some of these novel ideas in order to try and improve the quality of life, both for our administrators and for the students in your classrooms. So go ahead, you can take it.
Great. Thank you for setting that vision for the group here. A little bit about Metametrics. I'll turn it over to my colleague Lucy Willits, who is working with our states to understand who we are and our work.
Hey, thanks, Amber. Metametrics started, almost 40 years ago, and our role is a education research company. We created Lexiles and Quantiles, which is a scale for math and reading, and we work with states and commercial partners all across the country. And we're thrilled to be working with Montana. We have over 20 some states that we work with that is part of giving Lexels and Quantiles on summative assessments. And when Montana came to us about this potential, we jumped on it because we felt like there was a lot of opportunity there. So our goal is to, obviously improve student achievement, but also give teachers tools that they need based on a common scale.
And so now we'll turn a little bit more towards our pilot study purpose. And for this, I'll let Sue Steinkamp jump in, who is our SVP of Research and Development.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So as Dr. Bayless said, OPI is interested in investigating whether interim assessments that are given to students throughout the school year by districts can be used for federal accountability. One commonality across a number of interim assessments is that they report Lexile quantile measures. So while the interpretation of Lexile quantile measures is the same across the various assessments, the actual reported score can vary because of inherent differences in the assessments. So the first step in reaching OPI's goal is to look at how well or how close the performance of students on the interim assessments reported in terms of a Lexile and quantile score lines up with their performance on the state summative exam. So next slide, please. So this slide outlines the parameters of the data needed for this pilot study. OPI is in the process of recruiting a representative sample of the students in Montana to support. We want to be able to support the generalizability of the results across the districts. And so what this means in terms of generalizability and a representative sample is that we want the group of students that we're going to be using in this study for the analysis to represent, gender, race, ethnicity. We want students from large and small districts, urban and rural, free, reduced lunch status, all of those factors that really kind of describe the student population in Montana. In order to achieve that, we need approximately 1,500 students. We need 1,500 students for each interim exam selected by content area, which is either math or reading, and at each grade level. So we're limiting the study to grades 3 through 8. And because we need, a fairly large sample of students for each assessment, content area, and grade level, OPI has identified the list that you see on the screen as the higher volume interim assessments. And so right now, these are the interim assessments that report on a Lexile quantile scale. So you can receive a Lexile quantile measure from these assessments. And they also likely have larger administration within the state of Montana. So next slide. Just to give you kind of a high level view of how the study is progressing. This summer, August and then early into September, OPI identified the interims likely to be included in the study. We worked with OPI to identify and to document administration protocol that would hopefully produce the best results of the interim assessments for the study. And as you all know, Dr. Bayless and the OPI staff have been recruiting districts to participate in the study. So, and then finally, you'll see there's a lot of work that goes into even just upfront the preparation for the study that OPI has taken on, but they're working with the interim vendors to ensure that the interim assessments from a content standard perspective are aligned to the Montana standards. So now we're going to be collecting data, fall, winter, spring data from vendors for the interims for districts that have signed up for the study. And next slide. And then in June, the OPI will provide us with the summative assessment. And then really next summer is when Metametrics will, put our heads down, analyze the data, come up with results and recommendations of next steps for OPI. And then finally, as we alluded to earlier, this is a multi-phase study. And so based on the results of phase 1, we will determine kind of what's going to happen then in phase 2 and forward. What our goal is to look at the results of phase 1 and have, if we have results that are positive and that show we have good alignment, then phase 2 will really start looking at growth models that we can use to track growth across the assessments. And I will now turn it back over to Amber.
Thank you so much. So as many of you have been in touch, you are familiar with this enrollment process, but there are some districts who may not have enrolled yet. So I wanted to provide an overview of the key documents that have been shared as districts are onboarded to this study. So the first of which is a memorandum of agreement, and this document outlines the expectations of the district and also those of Metametrics through the duration of the study this year. We have also shared a PDF copy of the Interim Assessment Administration protocols that Sue just mentioned. This document has all of the detailed instructions that are unique to the school year, this school year's administration of the interim assessment for the purposes of conducting the pilot study. We know that there may be some inconsistency in the protocols in your district's administration due to the pandemic, or perhaps when you were enrolled, given the fall administration is closed for many of you. We just ask that you disclose those updates to Metametrics so that we can consider that as we're doing our analyses. We've also provided 2 files that relate to the data that we'll be collecting. One is a template that can be used for providing the student ID file that we were requesting. The other template details the variables that we will be requesting of the vendors so that there's full disclosure there, what we're asking the vendors to provide in relation to your district's data. If you haven't already, we ask that you complete the pilot study enrollment form provided to you via email. It's just a Google form that helps us collect information about the interim assessment that your district uses in each content area for grades 3 through 8. We're collecting information of related to your anticipated test administration windows so that as we start to examine the winter and spring administration windows, we can have all of the districts timing and consideration there. And also, if you haven't already, we ask that you sign and return the memorandum of agreement. We're handling that through DocuSign, so it's very slick to just go ahead and get that signed, and then you'll get a completed copy for your records as well. I do want to thank all of the districts who have completed that form to date. It really has been helpful in collecting the information that we need to continue our planning. So as I mentioned, another one of the files that was provided to districts is the Interim Assessment Administration protocols, so that we know that scores and score fluctuations can happen across test administrations. Factors that affect these things can relate to when tests are given, the testing environment, consequences of scores and student motivation. So to minimize the impact of these factors and others, OPI and Metametrics have talked through implementing 2 practices for the purposes of this pilot study. The first is a designated test administration window for the interim assessments for all participants in the study. So thank you for sharing your anticipated winter and spring administration windows. Once we have completed the enrollment process for all districts in the study, we will be working with OPI to designate a specific winter and spring one that aligns best with all districts. So you might find some shifting of your anticipated administration window for the purposes of this study for winter and spring. Another practice that we are doing for this study is implementing some pilot interim assessment administration protocols. So we're asking test administrators of these assessments to do a few things that are different from previous years so that we can look at the scores in a similar light that we may look at the summative scores. So we'll be asking test administrators to ensure a secure testing environment during the administrations, to ensure standardized testing conditions across each administration window, ensure that adequate time is scheduled to allow students to complete the assessments during the course of a single school day for a single subject. We will allow pausing as long as the student completes the assessment on the day that they start the test, and then that the interims be administered in person. There are some additional more detailed instructions for test administrators for before and during the test administration that's in the PDF. And if there's any specific questions about those, we can also address those. But I won't go into those here. If there's any inconsistency, as we mentioned, please just disclose it to Metametrics, and then we will take those disclosures and consider it as we are looking at the data. Now let's turn a little bit to the data collection. Here I have outlined specifically what districts will be providing and what Metametrics will be doing with that data. So as I mentioned, districts will need to provide Metametrics with a student ID file, essentially mapping the interim test ID for that student to the summative test ID for that student and the student's grade. So it's a 3-column file that will give Metametrics the information that we need to go to the interim vendor and request the data, and also map that data to the summative data provided by the state. The file should contain all students in the district who will be participating in this pilot study, and there's an Excel template just for reference. If you want to go ahead and just use those columns, that's fine. Metametrics will be using that ID file to collect data from NWEA or Renaissance or Smarter or whoever the interim assessment vendor may be. We will be requesting that they provide the students' scores from that assessment, the Lexile and quantile measures from that administration, and then the test administration date. As you can see, we are not requesting student name, student gender, student birth date, or other personal identifying information. So these files are strictly ID files and score files for us to do our analyses. Now that for many of you, your fall administration is complete, we will be initiating the process of collecting the data from vendors. And so here is a timeline for when we are hoping districts will provide the student ID file for us to proceed with data collection. For the fall administration, we request by the end of this month, if possible. For the winter administration, sometime by the end of February, and then in spring, we would be requesting that file towards the end of May. And these are no time like the present to send these ID files to Metametrics. So if you have them readily available, please don't wait till October 31st to submit them to Metametrics. These files can be shared through our study account, which is pilotstudy@lexile.com. So for a few of our study reminders here, just to keep us all on the same page, the enrollment form, please complete that if you haven't already, or if what you've heard from this presentation is piquing your interest and you're ready to enroll, we appreciate that. And we ask that you go ahead and submit the information through that form. Review and return the memorandum of agreements. We have many already from districts, so thank you for those of you who have already signed and returned those. And then begin to prepare and return that district student ID file that includes grade, interim test student ID, summative test student ID by the end of the month. On our side, we will be returning the fully executed memorandum of agreements. We will be working with OPI to establish and then communicate those winter and spring test administration windows. And we will begin to initiate collecting the data from the vendors for this pilot study. So that is an overview of the logistics here for this study. I'll turn it now to Matt Copeland, who heads up our professional learning offerings.
Thanks, Amber. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to join you. This is Matt Copeland. I'm the Director of Educator Engagement and Implementation here at Metametrics. I'm sure at this point, many of you are thinking to yourselves, wow, this looks like a whole lot of work. And of course, the very human reaction to all that is, well, what's in this for me? So to that end, Metametrics is very happy to offer to each of the participating districts in this study some free professional learning opportunities centered around the Lexile framework for reading and the Quantile framework for mathematics. And we will be happy to work with each and every district to make this fit for you. We know that this time of year and really all times of year are incredibly busy in our schools, and we don't want to overburden anyone with this information. However, there is real power and utility in these measures and the various tools that are offered for them. So we would love to work with your district to build a customized session for educators in your schools to help them leverage this opportunity to get the very most out of the Lexile and Quantile measures that you are receiving. As you see here on this slide, ideally, that's probably 60 minutes on the Lexile framework and 60 minutes on the Quantile framework. But again, we'll work with you based on your needs to customize something that fits for your location and for your staff. And certainly if we need to do kind of an introductory session for administrators and principals to kind of preview the information you're going to hand off to teachers, we can certainly do that as well. So when the time is right, we know you all have many things on your plates and lots to do, but when the time is right, please do reach out to me. You see my email address here on this slide, mcopeland@lexile.com. And again, what we can do is have a conversation about how we can make this work for you. Again, we'll cover a little bit of the background on each framework, but then really zero in on the free tools and resources being provided to Montana as a result of this study. And so just a quick snapshot on the next slide, you'll see some of the various Lexile tools that folks can use to leverage these measures, both by educators in the classroom, but importantly also by parents and families at home to encourage and reinforce that learning outside of our classroom walls. So when we take these 7 tools for the Lexile framework and the 9 tools for the Quantile framework that appear on the next slide, collectively, they really allow us to do 3 big ideas. One, they allow us to monitor student growth and progress toward our goals of college and career readiness. And one unique thing about these measures, we are the only game in town, so to speak, that can actually measure the reading and mathematical demands of individual careers. We've studied over 1,000 careers and can tell you what kind of complexity or what kind of difficulty a first-year employee will encounter, both in the area of reading and in mathematics. So when a child answers that age-old question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? We can look at the information and say, look, if you want to be a machinist, this is the level of reading you're going to be expected to do as a machinist. And this is the level of mathematics you'll be expected to do as a machinist. So we can take those kind of abstract theoretical goals of college and career readiness, and we can make them much more concrete for individual students. We can help to answer that question, when am I ever going to use this in my life, that we hear so often from students. Another big concept, another way that these tools and measures are really, really useful is to classroom teachers to plan their instruction and begin to differentiate based on the unique needs of each child. As we know, when we think about the reading abilities and the mathematical abilities of any classroom, we see a wide range across those students, from low functioning students to very high functioning students. And that places a lot of demand on a single classroom teacher to address all of those needs. The tools here in the Lexile and Quantile Hub can provide classroom teachers resources to help streamline that process. And embedded within these professional learning offerings, we will train your teachers how to take greatest advantage of these tools and these measures to make their jobs a little bit easier. So it's not one more thing on their plate they have to manage. It's something that will help them do their jobs better and more efficiently. And then finally, the last really big key of these tools is to use them as a way to communicate with families and our communities at large. Again, to help families not become classroom teachers, but to reinforce the learning that occurred in the classroom, to help them with their automaticity, to help them with their fluency in many of these ways, so that we are reinforcing the learning that occurs at school, so that each day when that child goes back, they're ready to hit the ground running and go from there. So again, as you all have time, please email me, mcopeland@lexile.com, and we'll be very happy to discuss with you how we can bring these professional learning offerings to your district there in Montana.
Thank you, Matt. And so we have a good amount of time here to deal with some questions and answers, because we want to hear from you districts, what your concerns are at this time for those who have enrolled, or what your concerns are at this time for districts who have not quite yet enrolled. Dr. Bayless, I'll just turn it over to you to go through the questions, if there are any in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take a look. There don't appear to be any questions in the chat box right now. If anybody here has questions, posting them now would be great. Either I can answer them, I can refer you to Amber Aguirre or Matt Copeland. So we'd love to hear what you have. There's a question. Is Ames Web an option? Amber Aguirre, that would be for you to answer.
Great. That is currently not an assessment that has been identified by OPI to be included in the study. Dr. Bayless, I don't know where we are with enrollments, if you think that that is one that potentially could be included at this point, but I believe that given the end counts that we need and the time that we are at in the year, that might be one that we'll need to consider at another time.
So right now, Ames Web is not one of the primary ones that's used. And according to Metametrics, we require 1,500 students per test per grade in order to use that assessment in the pilot study. So at this time, Ames Web is not something that we really have the student population in the, we don't really have the student population in the pilot study to support using that test right now. So thank you for the question. Amber, that would be yours also.
Oh, would you mind reading the question? I'm not seeing
Sure.
it on my screen.
It says, do we have to administer the NWA 3 times?
I can take that one, Amber, if you like.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, our preference is that the interim exams be administered fall, winter, spring. But if you are only administering the assessment in fall and spring, then we would still like your participation in the study, and we'll still use the data.
We have another question in the other chat, which says, are the listed interims on one of the first slides the only interim tests that you are required for the student ID file? Are the listed interims on one of the first slides the only interim you are requesting for the student ID file?
That's right. So through your enrollment, your district has identified which assessments you're using. If you're using 2 or more, we will be reaching out to you personally to talk about which ones to move forward with. Some of you might use an assessment for grades 3 through 8, while you use another one at just grades 3 through 5. So we'll be talking with you individually if that is a case that's happening in your district. But if you indicated in your enrollment, for example, that you use math growth at grades 3 through 8 in reading and math, that is the student ID that we are requesting, and that is the vendor that we will be working with to collect the data.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, this is going more quickly than I thought it would. No other questions? I'll give you guys 5 minutes just to see if anybody comes up with something at the last minute. Is it business as usual for the end of the year assessments? Yes, I believe it's business as usual for the end of the year assessments for this year. The ESSA requirements are still in effect, and the current state mandated system is still mandated at the federal level. So for the time being, those are still going to be in effect until we can put together a functional defensibility peer-reviewed project and submit that for federal review and legislative updating. And that takes quite a lot in order to get legislators and the federal government to recognize, especially an alternative system like this. And we're working on ways to make this happen, but that's definitely going to be a long-term, several-year-long process after we manage to get successful results from the pilot study. To clarify, hold on. Do we take assessments as per regular state tests? Yes. To clarify, we are not taking any more extra tests. Yes, that's correct. We're not requesting any extra testing from the districts. What we're requesting is access to the data from the districts that they have collected as part of their own assessment. So if you use NWA maps for local assessments, if you use Renaissance Star, if you use SBAC even, or if you use iReady, specifically, those are the ones with the highest student populations that get close to our minimum student numbers. But yes, to clarify, you're not taking any additional tests. Amber, I believe that's all correct.
That's correct. So our understanding is the district is administering these local assessments 2 or 3 times a year, and we will be collecting the data from those local administrations using our revised administration protocols for the school year only, and also collecting the state summative data. So it's business as usual on the state side, as Dr. Bayless had mentioned, and on the interim side, it's comparable to what the districts have done, have identified that they're doing this school year with their interim assessments. I say comparable because we are implementing those 2 practices for this study, specifying the administration windows for all participating districts for the winter and spring administration, and then also having those more standardized administration protocols that would be new for this year only.
Do we have any other questions from the districts and superintendents that are attending? I'll give everybody another couple of minutes until 9:35, and if we don't get any additional questions by then I think we will call it, and then we will get ready for the afternoon session at 1:30, where anybody who attended this one is of course welcome to the afternoon session. It will be roughly the same thing, but if you think of questions between then and now that you want to ask, you're welcome to attend at roughly based on the numbers now, roughly the 1:55 mark would be when we complete the presentations. So if you attend at 1:55, you would be available to answer. We would be available to answer any other questions that you may have.
We really do appreciate your time and wanted to be as concise and efficient as possible with our time with you. So we're glad that this information, was able to be shared with you this morning and give you the opportunity to collectively ask questions and hear from Metametrics directly. But if there are not any more questions, again, we do really appreciate your time this morning, and if you join us for this afternoon as well. And we also appreciate OPI bringing us together and leading us through this innovative opportunity.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. If you do have any other statements or questions you'd like, you can either contact myself. If you have questions for OPI, you can contact Matt Copeland, as he's working directly with many of the districts, or you could contact both of us and put our emails together on the same email. So many of you already have my email. If you don't, it's available on the OPI website. Project manager, Dr. Tran Bayless is who I am. And then Matt Copeland already placed his email in the presentation, and the presentation recording should be available for superintendents to see on the website relatively shortly. So in the next couple of days. So you can find it there if you have any additional concerns or happen to forget any of the information that you need. So thank you very much for your time, and everybody have a great day. Thank you, Metametrics, for showing up and helping us run this webinar. And I will see all of the Metametrics people again at 1:30 this afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.